My father's authority crumbles under the weight of his own entitlement, and even Cullen's aggressive outburst cannot shake my resolve. I laid down an ultimatum: either they acknowledge and respect me as a person with needs and dreams, or they must face the silence created by the withdrawal of my support. Every angry word, every desperate plea from them is met with my unyielding declaration, underscoring the irreversible shift in our dynamics. The late autumn wind bites at my skin as I push open the creaking door of my family home, a place that on nights like this feels colder than the chill seeping through its drafty walls. I drag my weary body inside each step, resonating with the exhaustion of another day, where my sacrifices were expected, never acknowledged. I clutch my bag of worn-out receipts and faded bills, symbols of the relentless drain on my life. The living room is steeped in a dim, oppressive gloom. A solitary lamp casts harsh shadows over the tense scene unfolding before me. My father's voice, rough and demanding, reverberates through the silence. "Vera, I need you to cover this debt now," he insists, his tone brooking no refusal. His eyes, once warm with misguided pride, now coolly calculate the cost of my compliance. My mother sits nearby, her silence an unspoken endorsement of his greed. Her vacant gaze speaks volumes, a tacit betrayal that stings more deeply than any harsh word. Across the room, my younger brother Cullen lounges with an air of smug entitlement, his laugh cutting through the tension like a razor. I pause at the doorway, heart pounding in dissonance with the discord filling the space. At that moment, I feel reduced to nothing more than a bank account, a tool to be exploited. They don't see me. They only see the money echoes in my mind as I try to steady my breathing. I set my bag down deliberately as if to ground myself against the emotional onslaught awaiting me. Taking a slow, determined step toward the argument, I feel my resolve harden. But before I can even add my voice to the chaos, Cullen's mocking tone slaps at my ears. "Who else would pay for everything, Vera?" he sneers loud enough for everyone to hear his words laced with derision. The words feel like a final dismissive shove, reminding me of every moment I've been used, every dollar extracted from me with utter disregard for who I am. In the midst of their bickering, I withdraw my phone from my pocket and discreetly open the bank app. The cold numbers flash up on the screen, my dwindling savings the sum of years of silent sacrifice. Each decimal a testament to the long hours and sleepless nights I endured for a family too blinded by entitlement to notice my own suffering. I let a surge of bitterness mix with the chill of the autumn air inside my veins. I am no longer the obedient daughter, the invisible supporter of this dysfunctional household. Beneath my calm, acquired composure lies a simmering storm of frustration and defiance. Every expense, every unpaid sacrifice has chipped away at the faith I once had in family unity. Instead of gratitude and love, I have been met with open-handed exploitation masked in routine domesticity. I step fully into the room, now each movement deliberate. The conversation halts as eyes turn toward me, calculating and dismissive. My father's jaw tenses, and my mother's eyes momentarily reveal a flicker of guilt, quickly crushed by habitual indifference. Cullen's smirk widens as though my mere presence confirms his self-righteous position. "Enough," I say softly, but with a finality that makes the silence around us swell with the weight of my truth. My voice is low, but each syllable carries the burden and the power of years spent in servitude to a family that sees only numbers. I'm not here to be your walking ATM. For a brief heartbeat, the room seems to recoil at my declaration, the air growing heavier with the promise of consequence. In that charged moment, I am aware of every detail: the faint creak of a floorboard, the shallow gasp from my mother as she averts her eyes, the disbelief in Cullen's gaze. Yet even as shock flits across their faces, my internal resolve is already shifting, seeping into every pore. I am reclaiming myself piece by piece. The weight of control they have imposed on me begins to fracture under the pressure of my own rising indignation. I retreat momentarily to a corner near the window, away from their accusatory stares, and look out at the oppressive darkness outside. The exterior, with its biting wind and barren branches, mirrors the void inside me, a space where I have long stored my quiet resentment. In that solitude, I allow myself to feel every fraction of betrayal, every ounce of exhaustion from being treated as a mere source of funds. My pulse is loud enough that for a moment I can almost hear it declaring war on the injustice that has defined my days. The burden of unpaid bills and relentless financial demands is not just a monetary issue, it's a symbol of the deeper emotional exploitation at the core of this household. I remember every time I shelved my own dreams to pay for my brother's tuition, every medical bill that was conveniently charged to my account without so much as a thank you. These memories mix with the burgeoning anger into a cocktail I no longer wish to swallow. As the room slowly returns to its uneasy murmur, I steel myself further. I know that tonight I will let my inner truth echo louder than their deceptions. I glance around at the family I once held dear, now alien figures whose faces have become masks of greed and entitlement. I acknowledge that this moment is a turning point, a silent vow that I will no longer allow them to define my worth solely by the value of the money I keep depositing into their lives. I return to the center of the room, my expression set, and my aura quiet yet unyielding. I'm not your vault, I state clearly, each word measured and resolute. It is in this small, hushed declaration that I begin to realize the magnitude of my awakening. Tonight, I embrace the reality that while I may have been used for money, I am so much more than a source of funds. I am a person with dreams, desires, and a right to autonomy, a truth that no amount of familial entitlement can ever diminish. In the oppressive silence that follows my admission, the air seems to tremble with the weight of unspoken reckonings. I can feel the simmering tension coalesce around me, a tangible force that promises change. The journey ahead is shrouded in uncertainty, yet for the first time in many long years, I sense the flicker of a rebellion, a spark destined to transform the darkness of my existence into the light of a newly reclaimed identity. The dinner table had always been a stage for our unsaid resentments, but tonight it felt like a ticking time bomb. I sat across from my father, my mother's placid face offering no refuge, and Cullen's smug smirk, a cruel punctuation to every passing moment. The aroma of overcooked vegetables and stale bread did little to mask the underlying tension, a tension that had been building for years. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat a reminder of every unpaid sacrifice I had made, every time I had been forced to trade my own happiness for their comfort. As I pushed my food around my plate, I struggled to ignore the gnawing anger coursing through my veins. The clink of the cutlery against the plates punctuated the silence, a silence that weighed heavier than any word spoken. I had spent countless nights agonizing over the cost of living, over the reckless demands that drained my savings and spirit alike. Tonight, however, the dam was reaching its breaking point. I could no longer contain the torrent within me. With a shaky breath, I looked straight into my father's eyes and spoke, my voice quieter than I'd intended, but laced with a fierce determination. I've been carrying this family for too long, both financially and emotionally. I deserve to be seen as a person, not just a cash source. My words hung in the air, raw and unapologetic. Before I could continue, my father's face contorted with anger. "You think you're doing us a favor," he barked, slamming his fist onto the table. "You owe us for everything, for every meal, every bill, every sacrifice." His rhetoric, meant to belittle, only served to stoke the embers of my frustration into a roaring blaze. As if on cue, Cullen leaned forward and added his own venom, his voice dripping with contempt. "Who else will pay for this house if you leave?" "Don't be selfish, Vera. We're family." His words, sharp as knives, sliced through the air. Each syllable was a reminder of how I had been reduced to nothing more than a financial cushion, a tool to be manipulated, not a cherished member of this family. In that split second, as his words echoed in my ears, memories surged through my mind like bitter flashbacks. I remembered the night I had silently counted every penny after paying Cullen's tuition fees, pennies, sacrificed in the name of familial duty. I recalled the long hours spent working extra shifts while my dreams of independence lay dormant, hidden behind the expectation that my hard-earned money would always fill the gaping financial void at home. And I remembered the medical bills piled high and unpaid by another's indifference, all laid on my lap as if it were my eternal obligation. Each memory was a weight pressing down on my chest, a constant reminder of a life lived without reciprocity or gratitude. The more I recalled, the hotter my anger grew. I could feel it roaring inside, surging upwards until it demanded expression. The room grew unbearably tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations and years of neglect. My father's face reddened, his eyes wild with a mix of fury and wounded pride. My mother's gaze faltered momentarily, betraying a hint of regret, before the familiar mask of indifference slid back into place. And Cullen, his smirk widened as though he reveled in my misery. I had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. "I'm done being your safety net," I declared, my voice trembling with both fear and adrenaline. I slammed my hand onto the table so forcefully that a set of cutlery clattered to the floor, drawing every eye in the room. The sound resonated, a literal and metaphorical breaking point in the cacophony of our dysfunctional life. My father staggered back as if struck, and for a moment the room seemed to stop spinning. "You think you can just leave us? Just abandon your responsibilities?" he yelled, his voice cracking with incredulity. But the words no longer carried any weight. The years of weighted expectations spilled out of me raw and untamed. "I am not your ATM, your bank, or your treasure chest," I said, each word deliberate and defiant. "Your exploitation ends now. I'll no longer fund your dreams at the expense of mine." The table around me was frozen in a stunned silence. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears in an expression of sorrow and resignation, while Cullen's face betrayed a mix of shock and indignation. His earlier taunts now seemed feeble and far away, replaced by the stark reality of my rebellion. They had always dismissed my feelings, treating them as irrelevant, but tonight my voice had shattered that illusion. As I looked around at the family that had for so long taken me for granted, I felt an overwhelming mixture of liberation and despair. I was reclaiming my identity, my worth, not as a provider for this family of need, but as a person deserving of respect and genuine care. The burden of unrecognized sacrifices, the ledger of debt tracking every moment of my life, was clenched tightly in my heart no more. Instead, I felt lighter, as if each word I uttered stripped away another layer of their control. "Maybe you'll finally learn that I have dreams, ambitions, and a life outside this suffocating room," I continued, my voice softening just enough to let the truth resonate. "I won't be the one to prop up your greed and self-indulgence any longer. Today I'm choosing myself for the first time." In that sentence, every suppressed emotion was laid bare, the sorrow of being unseen and the fierce hope of reclaiming my life. With one last look at the baffled faces around me, I rose from the table. Each step toward the exit was a reclaiming of a life that belied the chains of dependency I had long endured. I didn't wait for anyone's pleas or protests. The moment my hand gripped the doorknob, I understood that walking away was my statement of freedom, a declaration that I would serve no one's greed no longer. As I stepped into the cool night, the heavy autumn air wrapped around me like a shroud of both solace and finality. I felt the chill, not just on my skin, but in my very soul, a soul reborn amidst shattered expectations. With my spine straightened in defiance, I left behind the oppressive echoes of that dinner table, the angry voices, a fading murmur behind the door. I clutched my independence like a burning ember, knowing that every painful sacrifice had led me to this moment of liberation. In the silence of the night, I made a silent vow I would rebuild my life on my own terms, free from the chains of unrecognized worth. I had taken the first irreversible step toward a new beginning, and as the door shut behind me, so too did the chapter of perpetual exploitation, leaving me standing in the cold starlight with hope rekindled within. After that explosive dinner, the night seemed to hang in an endless limbo, a muted silence that was heavy with the aftermath of my defiant words. I returned to the solitude of my bedroom, a small sanctuary where the chaos of the household faded into a distant hum. The glow of my laptop screen became the only light in the darkness, a silent witness to the birth of my calculated rebellion. I sank onto the edge of my narrow desk chair, my mind racing through memories of every unpaid bill, every penny spent on my family's whims. The clamor of my father's harsh voice and Cullen's cutting remarks replayed like an unwelcome loop. But now, instead of drowning in despair, those memories sharpened my focus. I opened my laptop and began the meticulous process of gathering evidence. A ledger not just of my finances, but of every instance where I had been exploited, every moment my worth had been reduced to mere currency. I logged into my bank account and started downloading statements, each document a cold, unyielding record of my sacrifices. I methodically scrolled through pages of transactions, the rent that was split in unfair proportions, the tuition payments for Cullen, the emergency calls that always ended with my name next to a sum I never agreed to muster. I took screenshots and printed hard copies, filing them into a digital archive that would one day serve as an irrefutable account of my years of silent subjugation. Every click resonated with a definitive purpose, each document a silent proclamation that my value extended far beyond the numbers on a screen. As I sifted through the evidence, my thoughts flowed with a quiet determination. If they want a war, I'll give them one they can't ignore, I told myself repeatedly. This wasn't a rash decision born of emotion. It was a strategic withdrawal from a system built on exploitation. Every receipt, every scanned bank statement was a building block in the fortress of truth I was constructing against the manipulation of my family. While I was immersed in the digital archive of my broken promises, I heard footsteps in the hall. I looked up to see Cullen leaning against the doorway, his expression a mixture of curiosity and derision. "What are you doing, Vera, planning to become the family accountant or something else?" He jeered, his tone mocking, yet tinged with nervous amusement. For a split second, I hesitated should my actions be validated by his irrelevant opinion, but then I squared my shoulders, letting my calm determination seep into every word. "I'm simply taking stock of everything I've given," I replied coolly, my eyes never leaving the screen. "I want the truth to be undeniable, even if it's hidden in spreadsheets and receipts." My words, measured and deliberate, seemed to hang in the air, challenging him to dismiss the gravity of my actions. His smirk faltered for just a moment, evidence that deep down he sensed the magnitude of what was unfolding. Back at my laptop, I shifted my focus to another phase of my plan. I had long realized that my financial lifeline was the very link that kept me chained to this household. With a few keystrokes, I began canceling household utilities and subscriptions that I had single-handedly funded for as long as memory serves me. One by one, the services that had steadied the family's convenience, electricity, water, internet, even the streaming service that provided a rare moment of escape, were terminated with cold precision. Each cancellation confirmation that flashed on my screen was both a liberation and a declaration of independence. I knew that when they discovered the silence of empty outlets and the abrupt stop of convenience, they'd finally be forced to confront the reality of their insatiable greed. In the quiet hum of my home office, every action I took was deliberate. I created a folder labeled Exploitation Evidence on my desktop, diligently naming each file, with dates and descriptions, ensuring there was no room for ambiguity. The digital record of my life was being rewritten with every click, a testament to the years of being undervalued, now metamorphosed into the blueprint of my resistance. My heart pounded steadily as I paused to consider the significance of my work. This wasn't merely about canceling services or assembling receipts. It was an act of reclaiming my autonomy. I reminded myself that actions, however quiet, could shake the foundations of even the most oppressive systems. I was no longer the invisible wellspring sustaining this household. I had become its antagonist, a ghost in its machine armed with undeniable proof of my exploitation. I took a brief break from the digital assault to glance at the small, half-packed suitcase lying in the corner of my room. Its readiness was a silent promise, a tangible reminder that I was already preparing for the moment I would walk away for good. Inside, a few essential clothes and personal items lay in an organized yet haphazard bundle. They symbolized not only my escape, but also the painful recognition that I had devoted too much of myself to a home that never truly belonged to me. The suitcase was both a burden and a beacon, a harbinger of the liberation that awaited if I ever decided to sever these ties completely. The soft tapping of keys returned as I resumed work, my resolve hardening with every document and cancellation sent into cyberspace. I composed detailed emails to service providers requesting immediate termination of the accounts and services that had fueled my family's routines. The act was clinical, almost surgical, the slicing away of the resources that had made me indispensable to them. I felt an odd mix of satisfaction and sorrow with each confirmation number that blinked on my screen, a signal that another phantom tether was being cut. Throughout this quiet crusade, the memory of Cullen's mocking replaced his earlier smirk with a furrowed brow. His frustration, barely concealed by his snide commentary, was palpable, yet I remained untouched by his bitterness, for his words were as empty as the bank accounts he so carelessly took for granted. My focus was unwavering, tethered to a vision of a future where I would be respected not for my wallet, but for the person I deserved to be. In that dimly lit room, under the watchful gaze of my solitary laptop screen, I discovered the liberating beauty of quiet rebellion. I realized that often the loudest wars are fought in silence, not in explosive outbursts at a dining table, but in methodical, calculated acts that chip away at the very foundations of control. Each file, saved each canceled service, was a step closer to regaining my life, transforming my pain into proof and my sacrifice into strategy. As the night deepened, I closed my laptop with a finality that resonated in the silence of my room. The evidence was secured. The ties that bound me were systematically unraveling, and my heart beat with a newfound strength. I whispered to the darkness, if they crave disruption, then disruption they shall have. With that, I embraced the solemn power of my quiet retaliation, a promise that no matter the cost, I would never again allow their exploitation to define me. I lay back on my bed, staring up into the night sky through the small window, knowing that my rebellion had only just begun. The journey ahead was uncertain, but my purpose was as clear as the spark of rebellion that now burned within me. Late that night, as the reluctant breaths of the household settled into an uneasy quiet, I slowly stepped into the living room. The usual hum of the appliances was replaced by an alarming silence. The lights flickered intermittently, and the stubborn tap in the hallway emitted only a few mournful drops before surrendering to emptiness. I knew the silence was more than a coincidence. It was the result of my deliberate actions, a final blow against the system that had long fed on my sacrifices. I found my father standing in the doorway, his face contorted between fear and anger as he surveyed the darkness now reigning in our home. My mother, usually muted in her quiet compliance, hovered by the sofa, her eyes wide and hesitant, betraying a flicker of panic beneath her habitual resignation. In the center of this storm of confusion was Cullen, his posture tense, fists balled at his sides, his normally mocking expression replaced with raw vulnerability. Every literally cut wire and every extinguished light served as a stark, tangible reminder that our lives, long dictated by convenience and entitlement, were now stripped bare. I stood there, calm and resolute, the weight of every unpaid bill and every dismissed sacrifice anchoring me in that moment. When my father's voice finally broke the silence with a trembling accusation, "Vera, what did you do?" I met his glare with quiet resolve. "I did it," I replied evenly, my voice resonating with a firmness that I had only recently discovered within myself. "I cut the lifelines you've come to abuse. This isn't just a power outage. It's the sound of every sacrifice and every ignored plea being brought to a halt." My words, measured yet searing, filled the charged air, forcing every person in the room to confront the undeniable truth. My father's eyes, once so assured in his authority, now danced with uncertainty. My mother's features crumpled briefly, as if the realization of her complicity in this endless exploitation hit her all at once. And then there was Cullen, whose face racked with conflicting emotions, a cocktail of anger and a dawning understanding that his dependence on me had defined him for far too long. Before any of them could muster a coherent response, Cullen's frustration boiled over. With a sudden, almost desperate gesture, his hand lunged forward, aiming to grab my arm as if to physically wrest control back from me. His attempt at intimidation, however, was met with an immovable silence. I stepped back without flinching my eyes, never leaving his, as I met his aggression with unwavering calm. "Cullen," I said firmly, "you've always seen me as nothing more than a wallet, a source of funds to line your pockets and cushion your missteps. Tonight, you must finally face the silence I've chosen to impose as your reckoning." The sharpness of that declaration hung in the air, each word loaded with years of frustration and the weight of cumulative grievances. "You treated me like a cash register, a bank on demand. Now live in the silence I create." I continued my tone, both an ultimatum and an open invitation for change. The phrase cut through the lingering tension, like a knife forcing an uncomfortable pause, where each of us stood at the crossroads of past turmoil and an unforeseen future. My father's voice, now shaky and uncharacteristically meek, attempted to reclaim the narrative. "You can't just take everything away from us, Vera. We need you." He barked, desperation and defiance mingling in his tone as he gestured wildly toward the lifeless appliances and the darkened windows. But his words rang hollow in the labyrinth of my own empowered conviction. I had long since realized that their dependency was a chain that bound me, and tonight every link was being intentionally severed. I moved further into the room, positioning myself where every eye could see me, not as the submissive daughter they had once taken for granted, but as the leader of my own destiny. "No," I responded to my father's plea, "this isn't about abandoning you. It's about reclaiming myself. For years, I have been funding your comforts, subsidizing your whims, and erasing my own needs to keep this fragile semblance of a family afloat. Now I'm declaring that I deserve better, a life of respect rather than exploitation." In that charged moment, as the room oscillated between chaos and reluctant introspection, even the darkened walls seemed to lean in to listen. I could see my mother's gaze soften for a fraction of a second, as if memories of gratitude and genuine care long buried under layers of financial obligation and indifference flickered behind her tear-laden eyes. Yet the grip of denial and ignorance was strong. She could not immediately reconcile the idea of living without me as their constant provider, and Cullen's eyes, now brimming with a tumult of suppressed guilt and burgeoning realization, betrayed the fragility of the arrogance he so eagerly wore. I took a deep breath, feeling the steady throb of my heartbeat echo through the quiet, resolute space of the living room. "I'm giving you an ultimatum," I stated, my voice rising just enough to underscore each syllable. "Either you all start respecting me for the person I am with, needs dreams and a soul beyond digits on a screen, or you'll have to learn to live without the support I've always provided. I'm not your safety net, and I certainly won't be your ATM any longer." Silence reigned for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then, as if the dam of repressed realities had finally been breached, the fallout began. My father's face turned crimson, his eyes darting away from mine. My mother sank into a quiet, trembling resignation. And Cullen, his aggression now tempered by an unspoken sadness, looked away, a silent admission of the role he had played all along. The fallout was immediate. In rooms where lights flickered erratically, conversations stuttered and faltered, and a chill of realization began to seep into every corner of our home. With every passing moment, it became undeniably clear that the control they had wielded over me was crumbling. The repercussions of their greed would no longer be cushioned by the false comfort of their entitlement. Before I left the living room that night, I cast one last glance at my family, their expressions a kaleidoscope of shock, denial, and tentative remorse. I felt a profound sadness in seeing the family I once knew, the family that had taken my unending contributions for granted, now struggling to comprehend the consequences of its actions. And yet, despite the sorrow, I also felt an electrifying sense of liberation. I had stood my ground, and in doing so, I had ignited a spark that could no longer be extinguished. As I closed the door behind me, the echoes of my declaration lingered, a final defiant reminder that exploitation has its limits. I stepped out into the cool night air, the silence of the now disrupted home behind me, knowing that the path forward was uncharted, yet undeniably mine. The rebellion against being reduced to a mere bank account was complete tonight, and with it, I had claimed a piece of my soul that had long been subdued. In that transformative darkness, as I walked away, I smiled at the reality of my own courage. The fallout of my actions would force them in time to reflect on the value of a life hidden behind numbers. I realized that in the silence I enforced, there lay the possibility of a new beginning, one where respect, care, and genuine appreciation replaced the transactional nature of our past interactions. And as I disappeared into the horizon of a starlit night, I knew that my voice had been heard, that I had redefined my worth, and that no one, no family, no obligation would ever again diminish the brilliance of the person I truly am. The first light of dawn crept hesitantly over the horizon as I stood in the dim corridor of the house that had long been my battleground and prison. Outside, the cold autumn wind whispered promises of freedom as it toyed with the last leaves clinging to barren branches. In those quiet moments before the world fully awoke, I took a deep breath and surveyed the remnants of a life defined by compromise and unrecognized sacrifice. Earlier that night, I had carefully packed the final contents of my belongings into a battered suitcase, a mosaic of memories and necessities that symbolized both the end of my servitude and the beginning of something entirely my own. Every folded shirt and well-worn book held a piece of the person I'd become, hidden beneath layers of expectation, obligation, and most painfully exploitation. Now, with the suitcase by my side, it was time to step away from the life that had mistaken my endless giving for an inexhaustible resource. I moved steadily down the hallway toward the front door, my fingers trembling ever so slightly around the cold metal of the doorknob. With a final deliberate glance over my shoulder at the darkened interior, once abuzz with heated arguments, quiet reproaches, and the unyielding demands of those who saw me only as a bank, I slid the key into the lock. The click that followed was not a sound of finality. Rather, it was the resonant note of liberation. In that moment, the house transformed in my eyes from a symbol of oppressive dependency into a relic of a past I was finally prepared to leave behind. Before stepping into the crisp morning air, I paused for a moment in the foyer to compose one last message, a final farewell, not only to the building that had imprisoned me, but to the family that had perhaps unwittingly taught me too well the price of being taken for granted. I opened my laptop and typed a letter that was as much an assertion of self-worth as it was a delineation of unyielding boundaries. In measured, unwavering words, I explained that I was no longer available to be the endless reservoir of their conveniences, that I would no longer fund dreams built on the foundation of my sacrifice. I told them, "I have chosen me, and I can no longer bear the weight of your entitlement or the echoes of past obligations." With a final click of the send button, I released that carefully articulated truth into the void, a message that was meant to penetrate the silence of their denial and force a reckoning with the costs of their greed. I stepped outside where the cool autumn air greeted me like an old friend. The morning was quiet, almost reverential, and as I began to walk away from the house, every step was imbued with the bittersweet fusion of sorrow and hope. The windows behind me glowed faintly in the early light, like eyes that had witnessed too much and now finally would have to confront their own reflection. I felt a pang of melancholy as memories of laughter, shared meals, and moments of vulnerability mingled with images of cold calculations and unending monetary transactions. Yet beneath that sorrow lay an invigorating thrill, the thrill of reclaiming a life that had long been held hostage by obligation and self-denial. Each footstep on the dew-laden path was a declaration. It was a shedding of the layers of doubt and self-sacrifice that had burdened my spirit for far too long. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement was rhythmic and determined a steady cadence that mirrored the resolute beat of my heart, now beating solely for me. I began to think about the future, a future where every decision, every dream belonged unequivocally to me. The road stretched ahead, uncertainty lined with both the possibility of solitude and the promise of self-discovery. I knew that liberation, like the crisp morning air itself, could feel both invigorating and isolating. I reached a small park on the edge of our subdivision where the trees stood in silent witness to the passage of time. Here, amidst the soft rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of early birds, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. For years, I had measured my worth by the sum of my sacrifices, the balance sheet of my life meticulously cataloged in receipts, canceled services, and overdue bills. Today, I was closing that ledger for good. I was choosing to redefine my value not in terms of what I could give, but in terms of who I was, a person deserving of respect, care, and the freedom to live a life unbound by the greed of others. A delicate mix of relief and solemn determination coursed through me as I walked further away from the oppressive confines of that home. I could feel my heart lightening with every step, the weight of a lifetime of obligation slowly lifting from my shoulders. Although the path ahead was uncharted and strewn with uncertainty, I sensed in each breath a profound hope. A promise that I would build a life where I was more than a bank account, more than a silent supporter of others' whims. I envisioned a future filled with genuine connections, creative pursuits, and moments of true self-fulfillment. Glancing back one last time, I saw the silhouette of the house against the rising sun, a dark fortress that had contained too many secrets and too much pain. With a final, resolute nod, I turned my back on it, determined to face whatever awaited with courage and authenticity. The morning embraced me fully. Every chill and every gust of wind seemed to shout a clarion call for new beginnings. In that quiet, hopeful moment, I realized that my liberation was not merely an escape from a past defined by exploitation. It was a bold, deliberate act of self-creation. Though the journey ahead might bring loneliness or challenge, I would honor the hard-earned wisdom of my rebellion. I was setting out into a world where my worth was not measured in dollars or in the burdens borne for another's comfort, but in the quiet strength and dignity of living a life true to myself. And so, with heart alight and a spirit unburdened, I walked into the early morning, ready to be the author of my own story. A story where every sunrise was a promise of freedom, and every step was a declaration of my birth as the person I was meant to be.